Imagine a game you've been waiting for years, saw amazing trailers, ambitious promises, and a hype that seemed limitless. And then it's released and everything falls apart. Bugs, frustrations, low scores, and widespread disappointment. But what if, against all odds, this game made a comeback? What if it turned into something truly good? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. About games that rose from the ashes, that were rejected at first, but managed to win back their place, because in the world of gaming, sometimes even failure can be the start of a major turnaround. Let's start the list with a perfect example of a game that redeemed itself, Cyberpunk 2077. Maybe it's the biggest modern example of this, right? When CD Projekt Red announced the game, after the absolute success of The Witcher 3, the hype was just off the charts. The marketing promised a revolution in open-world games, a living city, choices with real impact and total freedom. But when we finally got our hands on the game, especially on PS4 and Xbox One, what we saw was a disaster. Bizarre bugs, performance issues, frame drops, and crashes. All of that tainted what could have been one of the biggest releases of the decade and maybe even of all time. But what's most impressive is what came next. Instead of abandoning the project, the studio committed to fixing the mistakes, and then we got dozens of updates, graphical improvements, balancing, and optimizations. We also had the release of the Phantom Liberty expansion, and the game finally reached the level that many had hoped for from the start. The gameplay became smooth and enjoyable. The artificial intelligence was redone, the interface improved, and the overall experience became much more engaging. And nowadays, Cyberpunk is running perfectly. It's a respected title, praised for its mature narrative, dense and immersive setting, and also for its courage to reinvent itself. So if you haven't played it yet, give it a second chance. Learn to forgive, because maybe this is the best time to play Cyberpunk. Maybe now it's what it should have been at launch. And I say this as someone who finished Cyberpunk in 2020, right after it was released. I bought it during launch week, so I suffered a lot, but I finished the game. I liked it back then, and these days I've replayed it a bit on the PS5 as well, and the game is really much better. It's worth it. Another emblematic case is No Man's Sky. When it was announced, it promised something almost unbelievable. An entire procedurally generated universe with billions of explorable planets, unique fauna and flora, space battles, and total freedom. But the release of this game in 2016 was one of the biggest disappointments in gaming history. The game launched empty, missing most of the promised features, and quickly became a target for criticism. And then Hello Games, the studio behind the title, could have just disappeared from the map after so much frustration. But instead, they worked quietly behind the scenes. They kept releasing update after update, and what was once an empty and repetitive game gradually turned, over the years, into one of the most complete and ambitious experiences in the genre. And today, No Man's Sky has multiplayer, base building, space fleets, an expanded narrative, customization, space stations, creatures, and much more. So the sense of discovery and freedom, which seemed like an empty promise at the beginning, is now real. And this is the ultimate example of how persistence, humility, and hard work can turn a failure into a success. And if we're talking about redemption, we can't leave out Fallout 76. The idea of an online multiplayer Fallout sounded pretty cool on paper, but the execution was a complete disaster. The game launched full of bugs, without human NPCs, with a weak narrative and broken mechanics. The community tore the game apart, and Bethesda's reputation took a huge hit. But once again, there was an attempt at rebuilding. And over time, even if you still don't like the game, updates brought more NPCs, narrative arcs, and visual and technical improvements. The world became more lively, the missions more interesting, and the atmosphere once again captured the charm of the franchise's best moments. These days, it's still a game that gets a lot of criticism, but its evolution is undeniable. So for those who enjoy open-world exploration with a focus on crafting, combat, and online interaction, it can be a good game, especially if you're a fan of Fallout's unique post-apocalyptic atmosphere. Now we're moving on to what might be the king of both frustration and redemption, Assassin's Creed Unity. It also went through this cycle of downfall and resurgence. It was released in 2014 by our beloved Ubisoft and marked the franchise's arrival on the new generation at the time, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. With impressive graphics and a richly recreated Paris, the sheer number of bugs, glitches, and performance issues overshadowed any qualities the game had. Unity became a joke, a meme on the internet, a symbol of a game that was rushed to release, but little by little. The updates fixed those errors, and over time the community started revisiting the game. I was one of them. I finished the game after all that happened, and we noticed a lot of qualities. The parkour was refined, the animations were detailed, the missions allowed for freedom of approach, and there was a complete focus on the fantasy of being an assassin in that more urban Paris during the French Revolution, which is wonderful. And today, many even consider Unity to be one of the best games in the series, especially in terms of setting and movement mechanics. So it's a great example of how first impressions aren't always final when it comes to games. Days Gone might not have been as buggy or as broken at launch as some of the other examples we've seen here, but it was received with a lot of coldness and a lot of criticism from both critics and players. A lot of criticism from the critics. That one was perfect. The media pointed out issues with repetition, bugs, and a narrative considered generic. But over time especially, the public started to see things differently. The game gained a loyal fanbase that defends it tooth and nail. It has a more melancholic atmosphere, an amazing zombie horde system, and an emotional journey for our protagonist, Deacon. And the gameplay is based on survival, resource management, and we have to take care of our bike. The game has a lot of action and it gradually won over players who gave it a real chance. Updates and performance improvements helped polish the experience. And today Days Gone is for me a great game. It's looked upon very fondly, and it's one of those stories where the critics didn't get it, but the audience went there and saw the truth, right? People who really play video games went there and proved them wrong. And time ended up vindicating Days Gone, which today is a great game, sold really well, and for sure if you haven't played it, you should, because Days Gone is just too good. Watch Dogs 1, look, Ubisoft showing up here again is a curious case. The game wasn't exactly a technical disaster at launch, but it was a disappointment, mainly because of the expectations that Ubisoft itself built up around it. It suffered a huge downgrade because the trailer showed a living city, interconnected systems, cutting-edge graphics. But what we actually got was a more contained, limited experience with repetitive missions and a world that lacked much charm. Ubisoft was accused of the downgrade I already mentioned, and the studio's credibility started to waver. But looking back at this game today, it did have some good ideas. The concept of hacking a city, using the environment to your advantage, and the darker urban style still work. It's a cool game. And it actually aged better than a lot of people expected, especially after the releases that came after, like Legion, which was when we really realized what a bad game is, so it deserves to be revisited, just not with as much expectation as there was at launch. It's a good game, it has a good story, a great protagonist, but unfortunately, when it comes to gameplay, it falls a little short. Still, it's worth playing. And now we have here a curious case within a much-loved franchise, Dark Souls 2. Unlike the other examples here, it wasn't exactly a technical disaster at launch, but rather a sort of renegade child of the Souls series. Many fans rejected it because it had a different pace, a less cohesive atmosphere, and mechanical changes that divided opinions, like the stiffer movement and the way the world was connected. An example of this is when you take an elevator up a dark tower and suddenly a burning castle appears at the top of a mountain. So it's a transition that just doesn't make sense. And geographically, it breaks the immersion a bit. Besides some little gameplay systems that people didn't really like, for a long time Dark 2 was considered the weak link of the trilogy. But as the years went by, the community started to see it differently. Players who returned to the game realized that despite the differences, it has its own value, with a broader build system, memorable bosses, and an atmosphere that's truly unique. The atmosphere in Dark 2 is wonderful. Today there's a solid and loyal fanbase for this game who not only defend it, but consider it one of the best in the series. I'm going to finish this game myself. It's on my backlog, it's the last Dark in the saga that I still need to beat. I've tried playing it a few times before, didn't really enjoy it that much, I just wasn't in the right mood at the time, but even so, it's a game I want to revisit in the future, because sometimes we only understand a game's value when we come back to it with a more open mind, right? And so, Dark Souls 2 may not be most people's favorite, but over time it has earned the respect it definitely deserves. And now I want to give an honorable mention here before we wrap up the video to Dead Island 2. This game spent almost a decade in development, there was a mess at the studio, and it even became a joke because of how long it took. A lot of people thought it would never come out. I was one of those people, and if it ever did come out, I thought it would be a disaster, right? But when it finally arrived in 2023, it turned out to be a surprisingly competent game. It's not revolutionary or anything, that's true, but it has really solid gameplay that's actually really cool and a lot of fun. The combat is visceral, it has a good sense of humor, and a fun setting in a zombie-infested Los Angeles. And so, after so many years of uncertainty about what this game would be, not only was it finally released, but it was actually really well received, and sometimes, all you have to do is deliver something honest and well made, and that's enough to erase years of distrust. And these games show us that not everything is lost when a launch goes wrong. Initial failure doesn't have to be the end of a story, it can just be the first chapter. Then, with hard work, listening to the community, which is very important, and the desire to improve, it's possible to turn things around. And in the end, maybe that's exactly what makes these stories so inspiring. The reminder that redemption is possible, even in video games. Games shouldn't be released broken. When we buy a game, it should, in theory, already come in its best version for the player. So I'm not here making excuses for games that launch completely broken either. But It's important for us to understand that some games really are good, they just needed more development time, and if they're released in a rush, sometimes it's worth believing that they can get better in the future. And now I want to hear from you. Which game was missing from this list? I'm sure I forgot something here, so leave a comment with your game. What's your favorite redemption story in the world of gaming? Thank you so much for watching this video, and see you next time.